Many of us, Jetsunma, experience you as a woman of great courage on your path, and we thank you for your example.
Thank you.
As a controversial Buddhist nun,
Who's controversial?
what's the wisest thing you've learned so far?
Huh?
What's the wisest thing you've learned so far?
What's the what thing? What?
Most wise
What?
thing.
What? I ever did.
That you've learnt.
It's the wisest thing I ever learned. I don't know. I mean, it's very hard to say wisest. I mean, I can think of various things I've learned. One thing I think that I learned is that it's okay to say it's not okay. And if you say it without being too controversial, people hear. People do hear. That just because that was how it was done before, it doesn't mean it is how it has to be done forever. And things can change. I mean, when I first came to India, I would like to say, when I first came, I was staying for a time in a small monastery, which was started by this English woman, Freda Bedi. But there was a very intelligent nun there, and she wanted very much to study in a time when nuns did not study. So eventually they sent her to Sarnath, to the Tibetan university. This was back in the 60s. And she studied there. She was the only nun with 200 monks. And she studied very hard, and every year she came top of her class. She beat all the tulkus, she beat everybody. She came top for 2 years. After 2 years, it was a 10-year course. After 2 years, the Lama at her nunnery said, "That's enough study for a nun now. Come back." And they wouldn't support any further. And so she came back. She was heartbroken. But what could she do? She had no money. She had to go back. 2 years is enough education for nuns. So that has changed. We now have 21 Geshe-ma in this world at this moment, and next year we'll have a whole load more. And everybody thinks, why shouldn't they study? I mean, I have to say that once the idea came that nuns could study, the monks were incredibly excited about it and very supportive and gave wonderful teaching, and they sent their best teachers. And I have no complaints about the monks for that. They really have been wonderful and so supportive, not of ordination, but at least of education. And now everybody assumes when you start a nunnery that they're going to be educated and they're going to do retreats and they're going to do everything the monks do. So that's all within 20 years that's changed. I mean, when our first nuns came, they were so like this. Our next generations of nuns are so, the sky's the limit. You know, they don't even know that there was a time when nuns didn't study and practice and so forth. So I would say that really what I've learned is that even the Berlin Wall can fall. Really.
Oh, hi. Just here. I just wanted some advice. You were just talking about how difficult it is for people to embark on a spiritual path when their ego is in so much pain. I would like some guidance on how to best support somebody or whose ego is in so much pain, where there's a lot of reification and they're getting more and more angry about life but can't see their way through it and don't know how to get out of it. I just would like some ideas about how to best support somebody.
You know, I mean, without wishing to sound harsh, the Buddha said we are all the heirs to our own karma. In other words, we cannot take another's burden from them. You know, we can be there to be supportive, but we cannot if somebody is in a lot of mental or physical pain, we cannot take that from them. So, I think the important thing is that for anybody who's caring for somebody in that sort of situation, that they should also care for themselves, right? Because otherwise you get burned out, you get exhausted, your own life becomes just a burden for you as well as for the person you're taking care of. So it's very important that you just don't only breathe out to help that person, but you also breathe in to help yourself. And that you don't just have compassion for that person, you have compassion for yourself too. And that you give yourself a break and go out and have a good laugh and enjoy yourself. And because if you're only completely caught up in that suffering of that person, it doesn't actually help them. And it doesn't help you. It doesn't help anything. So one has to go, to be balanced and to be kind to yourself as well as to being kind to them. And in that way also that helps them more. If you're very just completely caught up in there, you just get sucked up into that dark energy. It doesn't help them. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help anything. So I would say have your own life as well as, giving loving attention to them, but don't let them completely enshroud you in their problems, because it won't help them. If it helped them, I'd say, okay, sacrifice. But it doesn't help them. And it doesn't help you. It doesn't help anything. So, balance. And give yourself a good time, being kind to yourself. Go out and meet other people who don't have big problems and breathe in as well as breathing out, really. And like the computer, you have to recharge. Otherwise your batteries go flat. Isn't it? You have a responsibility also to yourself. And that doesn't harm them. It can help them actually because you have a fresh energy. Do you understand what I'm saying? I think we're kind of one more and that's it because we're going to be running with
Hi. Jetsunma, I've been really touched by the revelation to me about the non-Himalayan nuns and their situation. I had no idea, and it's actually upset me deeply. And I think it's fantastic that you're empowering them or giving them the opportunity to be more empowered. So firstly, thank you for doing that. And I'm new to Tibetan Buddhism, as in last week was my induction.
Welcome to the club.
Thank you. And it's been a fascinating and slightly crazy ride. So it was actually really useful, this wheel you've got up here, because I've been told so often how lucky we are to be born into this incarnation as a human being. And that actually provided a context. So firstly, thank you for that context in that amazing complex wheel. And it's actually the complexity and, if you like, the symbolism that I wanted to ask you about. So I have a bit of a background in Theravada Buddhism. And you come...
Well, this is Theravada also.
Yes.
Isn't it, Bhante?
But...
Pure Theravada.
Okay, so the symbolism I've not had any experience of. And last week I was doing power practice, right? Yes, exactly. And I was, you're given this incredibly complex...
Visualization.
Exactly. Blue gods, four-handed gods, white gods, and all this. And for me, it was like, how much of this is cultural, how much of this is fundamental to Buddhism? And I was trying to find a way in. And the Rinpoche was, I think, wonderful in many ways. But for me, this was still like, I come from a very secular background. And I guess what I'm asking is, how could, and I'm interested in exploring Tibetan Buddhism more, how could I find a way in, or how would you suggest I find a way into that sort of complexity, that symbolism, and how much of it do you see as metaphorical, how much do you take as literal, all that kind of thing?
Oh,
Thank
come
you.
on. Yeah. I mean, of course, the visualizations and the complexities of Tibetan Buddhism are not indigenous to Tibet. This is what they incorporated from India. In fact, they took all of the Buddhism extant in India up to the 12th century into Tibet, and it happened to be a time when Vajrayana was very prominent, and so that was also what they took in along with the Mahayana and all the basic standard Buddhist teachings. So, and then they incorporated it, of course, with Bon, and that was the indigenous religion of Tibet, and so they made it their own, because every country that the Dharma goes to, they make it their own. And so they brought in those aspects of the Bon religion which felt comfortable for them, especially a lot of the animistic side of it. And I mean, for the Tibetans, with the Tibetan character and having nothing to do in their lives except sit and, visualize 12 armed deities, it worked well, because you consider Tibet. Tibet had, up until the communist invasion, they had no roads, they had no vehicles, they had no electricity, they had no television, they had no radio, they had no magazines, they had no novels, they had no radio, they had no telephones. Nobody read a book except it was a Dharma book. That's all they had. Their minds were so empty, essentially. It was like an empty canvas. If you go to Tibet, you will see it's so, the one thing they had, as my Lama one time said, the one thing we had in Tibet was space, right? And you can go for hours and hours and see nothing except a few yak. And so the outer landscape was so empty. And so when they came to decorations, it's so jam-packed, right? All their tankas, there's no space at all. It's all covered in things, right? Because outside it's so empty. So when it comes to decoration, if you go and see our temple, I mean, there's no space anywhere. Oh, look, there's a bit of space. Shall we have a pattern of this and this and this? Yeah. So likewise, because their minds were so empty, they could be filled like an empty canvas with very complex philosophical thinking and very complex visualizations, because there was so much room, right? And they loved it. Because, it got their mind very open and expansive and decorated with all this beauty of all the deities and all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and the lights coming in and the lights going out and so forth. And they had nothing else to do. I mean, if they were practitioners, right, okay, we need to go off for 3 years, okay. And then I went off for 3 years and did a retreat. And when I came out, if you read the biographies of lamas, it's like that all the whole time. Then I found this lovely place, and so I stayed there for 5 years in retreat. And then I came out, and nothing else. But in the modern world, our lives and our minds are already jam-packed. They're full, most junk, but filled to the top. There's hardly any space, and everybody's stressed out like anything, and their minds are already going and trying to, grasp so many things all at one time. So to put on top of that all these complicated visualizations to stress the mind even more, I'm not sure it's very helpful at the beginning. It's like building a mandala and a Buddha palace on top of a garbage heap. And I think, therefore, and many lamas, I'm not just me, lamas are also thinking like this now, that maybe some years of doing basic shamatha and vipassana is much better. Clear out. quieten down. Put some space there first. And I think for most people that is, some people love visualization, and if they really do and they have very visual minds, that's fine, great. But for those who don't and find it very difficult and very stressful and not very helpful, then I think just go back to the beginning. Tame the mind first. Tame the mind. Train the mind. Then you can go on. So I would say start by something very, very basic. Go back to breathing in, breathing out, right? And then once you've developed the ability to be aware and to observe, then to turn that back and observe the mind. And relax. Relax, relax, relax. Keep the mind open, spacious, but focused. Okay? So nandiye tamchi se ba ye to nye ba do na ban je ne ke ka na je ba la tu ba yi se be so le do a shu a jam ba pa wo ji ra je ba dang kun tu zam bo de an de jin de ti da kun ji je so da lo jing de wa de da tan ji ra tu ngo a chan cho sen cho rim bo ji ma cha ba nan je ju ji che wa nya ba me ba yang ko ne gon tu pe wa shu. Thank you all very much. May you all be very well and happy.
Thank you. A very, very special thank you to Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo for sharing your wisdom, your compassion. Endless. I mean, it's just, it really is. It really is endless. Thank you so much for coming, and please come back again. Please. Thank you.